So what is Adobe Lightroom? Well, it's been described as a professional grade digital photography program that includes image processing and a sophisticated image management and cataloging system. So it includes elements from programs like Windows File Explorer, where you can manage your files and folders. Adobe Bridge, where you can do the same thing, but it's more focused towards picture-based types of files. Adobe Camera Raw, which processes RAW files, and it can process TIFF and JPEGs if you so wish. I've included Photoshop there, but really Photoshop works in a totally different way to what Lightroom does, and it can do an awful lot of things that Lightroom can't do, which I'll cover later. But Lightroom also has some additional functions not available in any of the above, and most of this relates to the way it can handle metadata, and you can use that to find your image, to manage all your images anyhow. So what it can do, you can view and organize all of your images across all of the drives. Metadata, so you can assign metadata to the images, and you can search the metadata across all of the drives, and this is one of the main reasons I use Lightroom for the metadata. And you can process your images to certain limits within the limits of Adobe Camera Raw. So if you're familiar with Adobe Camera Raw, those are the sort of processes that you can do within Lightroom. And using the other modules, we can print, we can create slideshows, we can geolocate using GPS embedded metadata. We can publish to a book or the web. So that's what Lightroom can do. What it can't do is, if you're familiar with things in Photoshop, layers, styles, blend modes, montages. You can do a little bit of text within certain modules in Lightroom, but certainly for page layouts and things like that, you can't do that. Painting, vector graphics, complex layouts, you need Photoshop for those sort of jobs. So basically, any process that requires image pixels to be manipulated, to change the underlying pixels, you can't do that in Lightroom. So it's primarily designed as a raw file editor and manager. But using the same raw converter, you can apply the same sort of treatments to Photoshop, JPEG, TIFF, and PNG files. So it handles all of these different types of files in the same way, but it is primarily designed as a raw file editor. And the thing you need to remember is that this is really important, that Lightroom, everything you do in Lightroom is totally non-destructive. It never ever changes the original image. Okay, everything it does is like a filter over the top of these base images, and the way it processes and develops these images, it's stored, that information is stored separate to the images themselves. So Lightroom is divided into what's called modules, so that in future times, if a new idea comes out, they can add a separate module linked into the main system. So Lightroom, you can think of the main Lightroom program as a database and a camera raw processor. So within that, we've got the library module, develop module, and the map module. Now the library module creates a catalog. So all the changes made to an image are stored in what's called the catalog, and that's how the library manages itself. The develop module uses the raw converter, Adobe Camera Raw, in a slightly different layout to what you might be familiar with if you used Adobe Camera Raw with Photoshop, but it's the same raw processing engine. You can also do a little bit of processing within the library module, which again uses the raw converter, but primarily it's the develop module that uses the raw converter. And the map module uses GPS tags. These are metadata if your camera is capable of tagging a file with a GPS coordinates. So the map module uses those bits of metadata to locate where in the world your picture was taken, if it can do that. Alternatively, you can use the map module to actually annotate images that haven't got a GPS tag on them, if you so wish. Now the catalogue isn't just one catalogue, there's several of them, and some of them actually appear whilst the program is open and then close after the, well, disappear when the images when the program is closed. But the main catalogue is the catalogue file here, and this is where all of the processing changes are stored. Whenever you import an image into Lightroom, it generates preview images. Now we can change the size of these preview images all the way up to 1:1 size. And as you start importing more and more images, the space required, or the size of these preview images, start to consume quite a lot of space on your hard drive. So you need to be aware of the more preview images you have generated, or the more images you import into Lightroom, and the size of those preview images can have a big impact on the consumption of resources on your hard drives. We have a thing called smart previews, and these are medium sort of sized previews, but the idea is that if you've got external hard drives and you have them plugged in, you've imported the images from the external hard drives and generated smart previews, you can then unconnect that hard drive and maybe take your laptop away somewhere and do a bit of processing on those images using smart previews without actually attaching the main external hard drive. And then when you bring your, come home, you plug in your main hard drive, the external hard drive, these smart previews will then be applied, any editing that you've done to these smart previews will then be applied to the base image. And the sync data catalog is used to manage this sort of process. Now I never use any of this. This is mainly for professionals who do this sort of thing. But you need to be aware that if you need to do work without your hard drives being connected, you can use smart previews and do that sort of thing if you so wish. I don't use that. Then we have the create modules. You can create fairly basic type-up books. You can actually print directly from the Lightroom program without ever leaving it. You can create slideshows. So these are digital images projected onto a screen. So fairly simple slideshows. Or you can send your images to the web. So you can do all of that without leaving Lightroom. Now, before you can view any images within Lightroom, unlike a normal browser program, you must import them. You must tell Lightroom to import the images before you can see anything, before any images are actually visible. Now, another really important thing to remember is when you're importing images, you never ever change the location of those images. All you're doing is making references from where these images are located to Lightroom. It just creates virtual links. It never actually moves the images themselves. So even though it's creating previews of these images, they are totally separate from the base image, which is stored on your computer somewhere. So we've got the library, which is where we want to import the images to. But again, it's just a matter of creating virtual links to the source where the actual images are stored. So in this case, it could be from internal or external hard drives. So, and it goes through the import process, creating virtual links, say never moving the actual images itself during the import process. And it just remembers in the catalog where these images are stored. Now I prefer to create a filing structure like you used to do in the olden days.
Um, some of the books that talk about Lightroom, they just say, well, you can just import them using date order into your pictures folder and let Lightroom do the rest of it. But this is assuming that you're going to be using extensive metadata to label your images and things like that. I still prefer to place all of my images into dedicated folders in a structure. So say it's going to D drive on one of my internal hard drives. I'll maybe create a top level folder called raw files, maybe by year order, and then by subfolders within that. You can use any sort of structure you like, as long as it makes sense to you. Okay. I then have another top level folder for processed images. Actually, I have a processed internal hard drive, so a separate hard drive, but for the purpose of this, you can do it something like that. So within the year, competition entries, external competitions, some sort of logical filing structure, and then I drag images from the memory cards into these folders. Okay. So, but at the moment, we're just assuming that we've gone to set up Lightroom and we've got a load of images already on the computer. So we want Lightroom to be able to see these. So this is before we actually start importing new images from a memory card onto the computer. These are existing images that are on the computer. Right, so we can import single or multiple existing folders and subfolders in one import operation. Now you could say, okay, I want the Slimbridge folder with all the images there imported, and it'll do that into the catalog. Or you could select 2017 and it will import everything, all the subfolders within 2017 into the catalog. Or you could select the raw files and it will import everything, all the subfolders and subfolders and all the files. So everything within the raw files top level folder could be brought in, and that's what I do. So when I install Lightroom, I just selected the top level folder, import into the catalog, and it brought in everything. All the subfolders and subfolders and all the files within them were brought in as one import. And then the processed images, you can do the same thing again. I just drag that into, or told it to bring in the processed images into the catalog. Okay, and you can select multiple folders at the same time if you so wish. So, but just remember that all of these are just virtual links it's creating. It never actually moves any of these folders and files. So once it's in the catalog, don't go ahead and delete any of these main folders, because you will be deleting your images. It'll then complain that you can't find any of them. So all of the changes that you make to these images are just virtual like filters over the top of the images, and they're all stored in the catalog. Now if that catalog gets corrupted, of course the catalog itself needs to be stored somewhere. Now it will automatically store it somewhere on C drive, but as I say, as this starts to, as you bring more and more images into Lightroom, you may need to think ahead and think, I'm going to create a dedicated hard drive for Lightroom and all the folders and images for it, maybe on a D drive, another internal hard drive, because it will start to consume a lot of space. But anyhow, if you lose your catalog or it gets corrupted, then all of the work that you've applied to all of these images will be lost. You won't lose your actual images themselves, they will remain totally unharmed, but all of the changes you've made, which is contained within the catalog, will be lost. So it automatically creates a backup catalog, which is backed up at a predetermined interval. I think the default is about a week, but you need to save that when you're setting up Lightroom to a different hard drive, because if that particular hard drive that the catalog is stored on dies or something like that, then you've also lost the backup catalog. So the backup catalog needs to be stored on a separate drive, ideally. So that is how Lightroom basically operates and how we import images. And I'll be going through the importing process more in more depth in a future video.